friends, welcome back to my sewing room. My name is Becca, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this quilt top, which is a very small quilt that you could use to hang on your wall, add some borders to it, make it a baby quilt, or maybe just use it as a beautiful table topper. This is a quilt kit that was included in day 1 of the 12 Days of Christmas box from Open Gate Quilts, and the pattern is now available for sale on Open Gate Quilts website. I will link to that in the description box below, as well as the first comment down below. So if you want to hop over and pick up that pattern, maybe you missed out on the 12 Days of Christmas box, but you still want to make this with your own fabric, you can buy her pattern and do it along with me. In this video, I'm going to give you a very quick tutorial for how to make the 2 blocks that are represented in this quilt. You'll notice there is a square block and then a gift block here. They're very easy sews, very simple to put together, and honestly, this is a sew that you should be able to whip up in an afternoon and have it knocked out and ready to go. So let's just get right to it.
Okay, so what I'm going to be making today are 2 separate blocks. The first block is basically just a square with a border around it, and then the other one is a block that's made to look kind of like a present by having this ribbon crossing right between the middle of the block. So to make that, we're going to need a large square, we're going to need 4 smaller squares, and then we need some rectangle pieces of fabric. But don't worry, because this pattern and all of the cutting instructions is available from Open Gate Quilts. So I'm not going to give you the cutting instructions here, but you can head over to her website. All of the information for this will be in the first comment and the description box down below. Let's get started. So I'm going to make this block first. I'm going to take my big square, and then I'm going to take my 2 middle-sized rectangles, and I'm going to assemble it on either side of this square using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that we have those 2 rectangles on either side of this block, we're just going to press them out. The pattern might have different pressing instructions, but I actually found when I was constructing the quilt top that it didn't really matter whether the seams were pressed in or out or even open. So you do whatever works for you. I find that when I was working with these blocks, the seam wanted to go underneath the smaller pieces of fabric because there was less to grab onto over here. So this is just what I did. I'm going to grab my hot iron and give it a really good press to make that nice and flat. Then I'm going to grab 2 of my longer rectangles. I'm going to put those on either side of this block so that I'm creating this frame around that smaller square. Again, we're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Same thing with this block. I just press the fabric underneath that border print because that seems to be where the fabric wanted to go naturally, and I didn't have a problem with seam bulk when I did this. So that was our first block, really easy to put together. Let me show you how to put the second block together. We're going to take 2 of our smaller squares, and on each one of these, we're going to assemble a small rectangle to the right side of the block. Then we're just going to press this over underneath that sashing. Give it a nice press. Then we're going to take the 2 remaining small squares and attach them to the right side of this so that what we have is a little strip where we have a square, the rectangle, and then the square again. This is building out our rows for our block. I pressed the seams for these underneath that strip in the middle as well. Once these are put together, the last thing that we have to do is take this long rectangle strip and we're going to put it right between those rows and sew it all together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put the first one on. Then I'm going to press the seam bulk underneath that sashing. This next step, I'm not going to lie, is a little tricky because when we put this piece on to this piece, if we just sew it together and we're off at all, it could cause our ribbon to be a little askew or not perfectly centered. Now, spoiler alert, I did not care about that for my quilt top. I just sewed it together and I made it work. And there are several areas where the ribbon is a little off center, and I'm okay with that. But if you want this to be absolutely perfect, then you're going to want to take some time to mark and pin. And what I found works well for me is if I can kind of mark on this fabric where these sashing rows kind of continue to. So I'm going to grab a little ruler and a water-soluble marker, and I'm just going to draw a line on the sashing that extends directly from where that seam allowance is on both sides of this ribbon. And that's just going to give me a visual reference point for how this sashing goes. And that'll let me kind of take a minute here to pin this so I can line up my raw edge of my fabric, and then I can pull this back and take a little peek. And what I'm looking for is something that looks just like this. I want this ribbon to be perfectly lined up with those registration marks that I put on my fabric. If that looks okay, it probably isn't a bad idea to take a pin and just stick it in on either side of that ribbon to hold things in place, and then take this to your sewing machine and sew it with a 1/4 inch. Remember as you're sewing this to not sew over your pins. Once that's put together, I'm going to take a minute to press this underneath that center strip, and what I should have is a block where all of the sashing is nice and perfectly lined up, which really gives you the visual effect of a present. Now that I have both of these blocks made, it's time to put my quilt top together. And this is actually really simple. I'm going to pull in the picture that I got from the kit in the box. This is the entire quilt top. You'll notice there are 6 rows of 5 blocks apiece, and the odd rows start with the square block, so the one that we put a border on, and the even rows start with the present block. And whatever row you have, whatever you start with is what you end with. So that row 1, it's going to start and end with the square block, and row 2 and all of the other even rows will start and end with the present block. This quilt top overall is only going to measure 22.5 by 31.5 inches, which could be a great tabletop or table runner or wall hanging quilt. But if you wanted to add a little bit of extra fabric to the borders, this would make a great baby quilt. Maybe it would be a great baby's first Christmas quilt.
That's how simple this quilt top is to put together. This is definitely a sew that you could do in a weekend or probably even an afternoon. I'd love to see what your quilt tops look like. Don't forget to take a picture of it and tag me in it on social media so I can see all of the quilt tops that you are putting together using Monique's pattern. Thanks so much, friends, for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.